Chapter 1. Lessons from the Mud and Sweat. The rain in Seattle does not just fall, it attacks. It turned the suburban construction site into a sea of thick brown sludge that clung to everything it touched. Robert Black leaned against a rusted metal pole, his chest heaving. His muscles screamed in protest. For 48 hours, he had not been a billionaire. He had not been the man who signed million-dollar contracts or moved markets with a single word. To the world at this site, he was just Bob, a man who hauled heavy bags of cement until his back felt like it would snap. Beside him, his 15-year-old son Noah looked broken. The boy's face was smeared with grit. His expensive haircut was hidden under a cheap, grease-stained cap. His hands, once used only for gaming consoles and touchscreens, were now covered in raw red blisters. Robert watched his son wipe a bead of sweat mixed with rain from his forehead. "Are you finished?" Robert asked, his voice low and raspy. Noah looked at the small pile of crumpled $5 bills in his shaking hand. It was the payment for their long day of labor. "It is only $50, Dad," Noah whispered. He sounded like he wanted to cry, but was too tired to find the tears. "We worked for 10 hours today, just for this." Robert stepped closer, the mud squelching loudly under his heavy work boots. "That $50 represents 10 hours of your life, Noah. It represents the skin on your palms and the ache in your shoulders. Never forget that most of the world works this hard just to keep the lights on." Robert looked down at his own tattered canvas jacket. It was soaked through. He smelled of wet earth and exhaust fumes. This was exactly what he wanted. A reminder. A dose of reality for a son who had grown up in a palace of glass and gold. "Come on," Robert said, gesturing toward their old beat-up truck they had borrowed for the weekend. "The work is done. Now we eat." The drive toward the city center was quiet. The heater in the truck hummed, barely fighting off the November chill. Noah stared out the window at the glowing neon signs of the city. He looked at the people walking under colorful umbrellas, dry and comfortable. For the first time in his life, he felt like an outsider in his own home. They pulled up to the curb of a street lined with luxury boutiques. At the end of the block stood a building of white marble and polished brass. The Grand Summit. It was the crown jewel of the Black conglomerate. Robert had designed the menu himself 3 years ago. He had approved the velvet curtains and the crystal chandeliers that shimmered behind the plate glass windows. Robert turned off the engine. "We are eating here," he announced. Noah's eyes widened. He looked at his father, then down at his own mud-caked jeans and the torn sleeve of his hoodie. "Dad, we look like drifters. They will not let us through the front door. Look at us. We are filthy." Robert stepped out into the pouring rain and slammed the door. "We have the money we earned, don't we? $1 earned in the mud is worth the same as $1 earned in a boardroom. Let's go." They walked toward the entrance. The bright lights of the lobby felt blinding. As they neared the heavy oak doors, the scent of expensive perfume and seared steak drifted through the air. It was a world of warmth, a world of privilege. Robert felt the weight of his wet clothes pulling at his shoulders. He looked at Noah, who was trying to hide his face behind his damp collar. The boy was trembling, but not from the cold. He was ashamed. Robert reached out and gripped Noah's shoulder. "Hold your head up," Robert commanded. "You worked for your place today. Do not apologize for the dirt on your hands." The gold-trimmed doors swung open. A gust of warm, lavender-scented air hit them. Soft piano music played in the background, a gentle melody that seemed to mock their rugged appearance. The lobby was filled with couples in tailored suits and silk dresses. The clinking of silverware and the soft murmur of polite conversation created a cocoon of luxury. But as Robert and Noah stepped onto the plush burgundy carpet, the room went silent. The music seemed to fade away. A woman in a sequined dress pulled her silk wrap tighter and stepped away as they passed. A man in a tuxedo lowered his wine glass, his eyes scanning them with deep suspicion. They looked like a stain on a masterpiece. Two shadows in a room full of light. Noah slowed down his boots, leaving dark, wet prints on the pristine floor. "Dad, everyone is staring," he hissed. "Let them stare," Robert replied, his voice steady. "We are here for a meal, not their approval." At the end of the long hallway stood the host's stand. A man with slicked back hair and a sharp, thin mustache stood behind a mahogany podium. His name tag read Victor. Victor was currently laughing at a joke made by a wealthy regular, but as he looked up and saw Robert and Noah approaching, his smile vanished instantly. His face twisted into an expression of pure disgust. It was the look a person might give to a stray dog that had wandered into a wedding. Victor stepped out from behind the podium, blocking the path into the main dining room. He crossed his arms tightly over his chest. His eyes moved slowly from Robert's muddy boots to Noah's stained cap. "Can I help you?" Victor asked. His tone was sharp. It was not a question. It was a warning. "Table for two," Robert said simply. He didn't reach for his wallet. He didn't drop his gaze. Victor let out a short, mocking breath. "I think you have the wrong address. The mission is 3 blocks over. This is a private establishment. We have a standard to maintain." "I am a customer," Robert stated. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice so the nearby guests wouldn't hear too much. "You are a nuisance. You smell of the street, and you are ruining the atmosphere. Leave now, or I will have security remove you." Noah looked at the floor, his face burning red. He felt every eye in the room on them. He felt small, but Robert stood his ground. He felt the cold water dripping from his hair down his neck. He felt the exhaustion in his bones, and he felt a growing quiet anger. Not just for himself, but for every honest worker who had ever been made to feel invisible by men like Victor. "We have money," Robert said, holding up the crumpled $50 Noah had earned. "Is that not what this place requires?" Victor sneered at the dirty bills. "That wouldn't even pay for the bread service. Get out, now." The rain continued to drum against the windows outside, a rhythmic reminder of the world they had just left. Inside, the tension was thick enough to touch. Robert looked at the manager. He saw the pettiness. He saw the cruelty. The lesson for Noah was only beginning, but the lesson for the Grand Summit was going to be much, much harder. Chapter 2. Prejudice at the Temple of Luxury. The air inside the lobby felt heavy. It was thick with the scent of aged bourbon and the judgmental silence of 100 staring eyes. Victor stood like a stone wall. He straightened his silk tie, his fingers moving with a slow, deliberate arrogance. "I believe I was clear," Victor said. His voice was a cold blade. "This is a place for distinguished guests, not for people who look like they crawled out of a storm drain." Noah flinched. The words stung more than the blisters on his hands. He looked down at his muddy boots. A small puddle was forming on the pristine white marble. He felt like a bug under a microscope. "Dad," Noah whispered. He tugged at Robert's sleeve. "Let's just go. We can find a diner, anywhere else but here." Robert did not move. He stood tall, his wet canvas jacket dripping onto the carpet. He looked at Victor with a gaze that was terrifyingly calm. It was the look of a man who had faced down boardrooms full of sharks. "We are here to eat," Robert said. His voice was steady. It carried through the quiet lobby like a low roll of thunder. Victor let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He turned slightly toward a couple standing nearby in evening wear. Do you hear this? The audacity is truly remarkable. He turned back to Robert, his eyes narrowing into slits. Look at the floors. You are defiling this establishment with your presence. You are an offense to the senses of every elite client in this room. Victor leaned in closer. His voice dropped to a hiss. You are trash, and trash belongs in the alley. Get out before I have the police haul you away in cuffs, the guests whispered. A woman behind them gasped, shielding her child, as if Robert were contagious. Noah felt the heat of shame rising to his throat. He had never seen his father treated this way. His father was the man everyone bowed to, but tonight in these clothes, his father was nothing. Robert reached into his pocket. His hand was rough and stained with grit. He pulled out a small wad of crumpled bills. They were the exact notes they had earned at the construction site. $5 bills. Tens. Dirty and wrinkled. Robert laid the money on the mahogany podium. $50, Robert said. This is honest money, earned with sweat. Is it not enough to buy 2 steaks in your temple of luxury? Victor stared at the money. He looked at it as if it were a pile of dead leaves. He didn't touch it. He wouldn't dare soil his hands with poor man's cash. That wouldn't even cover the tip for a waiter here, Victor sneered. I am losing my patience. You are a drifter. You are an eyesore. And you are trespassing. Noah watched in disbelief. His father was being insulted, degraded, mocked by a man who wasn't fit to shine Robert's actual shoes. Noah wanted to scream. He wanted to tell them all who his father really was, but Robert's hand tightened on Noah's shoulder. A silent command. Stay quiet. The law says you are a place of public accommodation, Robert stated. His eyes never left Victor's face. We have the means. We have the hunger. Give us a table. Victor looked around the room. The whispers of the guests were turning into complaints. The manager knew he couldn't cause a physical brawl in the middle of the lobby. It would look bad for business. He needed a way to humiliate them further, a way to make them regret ever stepping through the door. A cruel smile spread across Victor's face. Fine, he said. The word was spat out like poison. If you are so desperate to spend your meager scrapings here, I will find you a place. Victor grabbed 2 menus. He didn't hand them over. He turned and began to walk. He didn't walk through the grand dining room. He didn't lead them past the windows with the view of the city lights. He marched them down a narrow, dimly lit corridor, past the coat check, past the bathrooms. The air here smelled of old grease and floor cleaner. At the very end of the hall, squeezed between a stack of extra chairs and the swinging doors of the kitchen, sat a single tiny table. The wood was scratched. The candle was unlit. Every time the kitchen doors swung open, a blast of hot air and the shouting of chefs flooded the space. Here, Victor said. He threw the menus onto the table. They slid across the surface and nearly hit the floor. A table for the homeless, Victor mocked, hidden away where the real people don't have to look at you. Victor leaned over Robert, his shadow long and dark. Don't expect the VIP treatment. You'll be lucky if a waiter even remembers you're here. In fact, if I see you move from this spot, I'll have the guards throw you into the rain myself. Victor straightened his jacket and walked away. His polished shoes clicked sharply on the hard floor. He left them in the dark. Noah sat down on the hard wooden chair. The kitchen doors slammed behind him. Bang! The noise made him jump. Dad, why are we doing this? Noah asked. His voice was trembling. He hates us. They all hate us. We don't belong here like this. Robert sat down slowly. He ignored the heat from the kitchen. He ignored the smell of the trash bins nearby. He looked at his son. His eyes were soft, but his face was set like iron. "Do you feel that, Noah?" Robert asked. "The way he looked at you. The way he spoke as if you weren't even human." Noah nodded. He bit his lip to keep it from shaking. "That is how the world treats those it thinks are beneath it," Robert said. "You must never forget this feeling, because one day you will be the one in the suit. You will be the one with the power, and in that moment you will remember this dark corner." Robert opened his menu. "Now let's see if we can get someone to serve us." The kitchen doors flew open again. A waiter rushed past them, not even glancing their Kong. They were invisible. They were shadows in the temple of gold. But in the shadows, Robert Black was watching. He was measuring the soul of his empire, and he found it wanting. Chapter 3. A Warning from Grace's Heart. The swinging doors of the kitchen were a gateway to chaos. Inside, the air was a thick fog of steam searing fat and shouted orders. Victor stood in the center of it all. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking out of place among the sweating cooks and clattering pans. He beckoned the head chef over with a flick of his wrist. "The trash in the corner booth," Victor said, his voice dripping with malice. "They ordered the ribeye." The chef wiped his brow. "I am low on the prime cuts, Victor. The late rush was heavy." Victor leaned in a dark glint in his eyes. He pointed toward a stainless steel tray at the edge of the prep station. On it sat a steak that had been sent back by a disgruntled customer hours ago. It was cold. It was gray at the edges. It had been sitting out far too long. "Use that one," Victor commanded. The chef hesitated. "That meat is spoiled, Victor. I was about to toss it. It could make someone very sick." Victor let out a cold, hollow laugh. "People like them have stomachs made of iron. They eat out of dumpsters, don't they? They wouldn't know the difference between a prime cut and a boot heel." He tapped the chef's chest with a finger. "Burn the outside. Mask the smell with extra garlic butter. Just get it on a plate and get them out of my sight." Standing just a few feet away was Grace. She was a waitress who had spent the last 8 hours on her feet. Her back ached. Her shoes felt like they were filled with lead. She was a widow working double shifts to pay for her mother's heart medication and her daughter's school books. She heard every word. Grace clutched her serving tray so hard her knuckles turned white. She looked at the spoiled meat. Then she looked through the small, circular window of the kitchen door. She could see them. The man and the boy. They sat in the dark corner, surrounded by mops and extra chairs. The boy looked exhausted. The father looked humble. They were just two people trying to have a meal after a hard day's work. They didn't deserve to be poisoned for sport. "Grace," Victor barked, "take this plate to table 42. Now." Grace felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She knew Victor. He was a petty man who loved his tiny bit of power. If she refused, he would fire her on the spot. He would find a reason to withhold her tips. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Not tonight. But her heart hammered against her ribs. She saw her own father in that man's weathered face. She saw her own child in the boy's tired eyes. "Yes, Victor," she whispered. She walked to the station and picked up the plate. The smell was hidden well by the pungent aroma of garlic and rosemary. It looked beautiful to the untrained eye, but Grace knew it was a biological weapon. As she walked toward the swinging doors, her mind raced. She couldn't speak to them. The restaurant was bugged with cameras and microphones. Victor watched the staff like a hawk from his office monitors. If she said a word, it would be over. She reached into her apron pocket. She found a small scrap of paper, a receipt from earlier. She grabbed a pen from the station and scribbled 2 words in jagged, frantic letters. Do not eat. She folded the paper into a tiny square. She tucked it under her thumb, her heart nearly leaping out of her chest. Grace pushed through the doors. The transition from the bright, loud kitchen to the dim, quiet hallway felt like entering a different world. She walked slowly. She tried to keep her breathing steady. Robert looked up as she approached. He saw the exhaustion in her face. He saw the kindness in her eyes that Victor lacked. He gave her a small, polite nod. Here is your dinner, sir, Grace said. Her voice was thin. She set the plate down in front of Robert. She moved to the side to set the silverware for Noah. This was her chance. She took a deep breath. Suddenly, she let a linen napkin slip from her tray. It fluttered to the floor like a wounded bird. Oh, I am so sorry, she said loudly. She bent down quickly, disappearing below the level of the table. As she reached for the napkin, she grabbed Noah's hand under the table. She pressed the folded note into his palm. Noah gasped, his eyes widening. Grace looked up at him. She didn't smile. She didn't wink. She gave him a look of absolute desperate pleading. It was a look that screamed for him to trust her. She squeezed his hand once hard. Enjoy your meal, she said, standing back up. She didn't linger. She didn't look back. She turned and walked away, her hands shaking so much she had to tuck them under her tray. Grace walked back into the kitchen, her heart thudding like a drum. She had done it. She had risked everything for 2 strangers. She stood by the dish pit watching through the small window. She saw Noah slowly open his hand. She saw him look down at the tiny scrap of paper. Robert was picking up his knife. He was about to cut into the meat. Noah's hand reached out and grabbed his father's arm. Grace held her breath. Outside in the dining room, the piano continued to play its soft, elegant tune. The rich and the powerful continued to laugh. But in that dark corner, a silent war was being fought. Grace leaned against the cold tiles of the kitchen wall. She prayed. She prayed that the father would listen to the son. She prayed that her act of mercy wouldn't be the reason she ended up on the street tomorrow. But as she watched the father put the knife down, a strange sense of peace washed over her. She might lose her job, but she had saved her soul. Victor walked past her, humming to himself. He looked through the window and smirked. Look at them, Victor said. They are so hungry they can't even wait to pray. Truly pathetic. Grace said nothing. She just stared at the 2 men in the corner. She saw the father's eyes scan the room. He wasn't looking for food anymore. He was looking for the truth. And Grace knew that once he found it, nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 4. The Note. That changed everything. Noah sat perfectly still. His fingers trembled as they curled around the small scrap of paper Grace had pressed into his palm. The heat from the kitchen doors behind him felt like a physical weight on his neck. He looked at his father. Robert had already picked up his heavy steak knife. The blade gleamed under the dim yellow light of the service hallway. He was about to slice into the thick meat that smelled so strongly of garlic and herbs. Dad, stop. Noah's voice was a sharp whisper. Robert paused. He saw the fear in his son's eyes. Slowly. Noah slid his hand across the table and opened his fingers. Robert took the note. He smoothed it out with his thumb. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. This food is spoiled and toxic. Robert felt his heart skip a beat. The manager is trying to hurt you. I will pretend to spill water so you have an excuse to leave. I will sneak you some fresh bread at the back door. Do not let him see this. Robert read the words twice. The air in the narrow hallway suddenly felt freezing cold. He looked at the plate in front of him. The steak looked perfect, but it was a lie. It was a vessel of sickness. A surge of raw emotion flooded through Robert's chest. First, a cold horror. He had built this empire. He had poured his life into creating a standard of excellence. And here, in his flagship sanctuary, a man was using his name and his resources to poison the vulnerable. But then, a profound sense of wonder. He thought of Grace. He thought of her tired eyes and her shaking hands. She did not know him. She saw a man with no power, a man with mud on his boots and no voice in this world. And yet, she was willing to risk her livelihood to save him. Grace was the soul of the business he thought he had lost. "Keep the note hidden," Robert said. His voice was different now. The weariness of the construction site was gone. It was replaced by a cold, commanding steel. Noah tucked the paper into his sock. "What do we do now?" "She said she would help us leave." "Wait," Robert replied. "We wait for the predator to show his face." They did not have to wait long. The clicking of polished leather shoes echoed against the tile floor. Victor appeared from around the corner. He looked like a man who had just won a grand prize. He walked with his chest puffed out. His hands were tucked neatly behind his back. He stopped at the edge of their small table. He looked at the untouched steak. "Is there a problem?" Victor asked. His voice was a mock purr of concern. "I noticed you haven't taken a single bite of our finest cut. Is the atmosphere of the broom closet not to your liking?" Robert looked up. He did not look like a drifter anymore. He looked like a judge. "We were just admiring the presentation," Robert said calmly. Victor leaned down. He rested his hands on the table. He was close enough for Robert to smell the expensive cologne that could not hide his rot. "Eat," Victor commanded. The mask of the polite manager was slipping. "I went to a great deal of trouble to ensure you were served quickly. It would be a shame for such a premium meal to go to waste." Robert stared at the meat. "It smells a bit strange, Victor. Are you sure this is fresh?" Victor's face tightened. His eyes flashed with a cruel light. He felt powerful. He felt untouchable. "I am the manager of the Grand Summit," Victor hissed. "My word is the only one that matters here. If I say it is premium, it is premium." He straightened his jacket and looked down at them with total contempt. "Now, eat your dinner and pay your bill, or I will decide that your presence here is a threat to our guests. I have the police on speed dial for vagrants who cause trouble. Do you understand me? Finish the plate, or finish the night in a cold cell." Noah gripped the edges of his chair. His knuckles were white. The injustice of it was like a fire in his veins. He wanted to stand up. He wanted to throw the plate at Victor's face. But Robert remained as still as a statue. He looked at the kitchen door. He saw Grace standing there. She was holding a pitcher of ice water. Her face was pale. She was waiting for her moment to save them. Robert looked back at Victor. He saw a man who thought he was a king. He saw a man who thought he could crush anyone who was smaller than him. "You really want us to eat this, Victor?" Robert asked. "I insist," Victor replied. He leaned in even closer. "I want to see you swallow every bite." Robert nodded slowly. He picked up the fork. He speared a piece of the gray meat. In the kitchen, Grace moved toward the door. She was ready to stumble. She was ready to lose her job to save a stranger's life. But Robert didn't bring the fork to his mouth. He held it up to the light. "I have a better idea," Robert said. Victor frowned. Huh, what are you talking about? Robert set the fork down. He stood up. Even in his muddy clothes, he towered over the manager. The authority radiating from him was so intense that Victor actually took a step back. I think we should let the health inspector decide if this is fit for a human, Robert said. Or perhaps we should let the owner of this building taste it himself. Victor laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. The owner. You think a man like Robert Black would even breathe the same air as you? Robert smiled. It was a dark, knowing smile. You would be surprised, Victor. You would be very surprised at who breathes the same air as you. Grace entered the hallway. She saw the confrontation. She saw the power shift in the room. She froze. The storm outside was raging, but inside, in this dark corner, a different kind of lightning was about to strike. Chapter 5. The mask falls. The silence in the cramped hallway was heavy. Victor stood with his arms crossed. He was waiting for the drifter to crumble. He was waiting for the satisfaction of seeing this man eat the spoiled meat. But Robert Black did not crumble. He stood up slowly. The exhaustion seemed to drain from his limbs. His shoulders squared. His spine became a pillar of steel. The man who had been hauling cement bags all weekend was gone. In his place stood a giant. Robert reached into the pocket of his tattered canvas jacket. He did not pull out crumpled $5 bills this time. He pulled out a sleek, black, satellite phone. Victor blinked. His sneer wavered for a fraction of a second. Where did a bum like you get a phone like that? Robert ignored him. He pressed a single button on the screen. He held the phone to his ear, his eyes locked onto Victor's face. The manager felt a sudden, cold, unexplained shiver. Marcus, Robert said into the phone. His voice was no longer raspy or tired. It was resonant. It was the voice of a man used to commanding thousands. I am at the Grand Summit, table 42, the service hallway. Bring the regional team, now. Victor began to laugh. It was a forced, ugly sound. Marcus, who are you calling your social worker? You think a fancy phone makes you someone? Robert lowered the phone. I am calling the man you report to Victor. I am calling the man who is about to take everything from you. You are insane, Victor hissed. He stepped forward, reaching for Robert's collar. That is it. I am calling the police. I want you in a cell. Sit down, Victor. The voice did not come from Robert. It came from a table just inside the main dining room. A man in a sharp charcoal suit stood up. He had been sitting quietly with a woman for the last hour. He walked into the hallway. Behind him, two other men in dark blazers stood up from different corners of the restaurant. They moved with precision. They moved like soldiers. Victor froze. Mr. Henderson, you are one of our most valued guests. What is the meaning of this? The man in the charcoal suit did not look at Victor. He walked straight to Robert and stopped. He bowed his head slightly. We were waiting for your signal, sir. The kitchen audio has been recorded. The video of the manager's orders has been backed up to the cloud. Victor's mouth fell open. His hands began to shake. Sir, why are you calling this person? Sir. Robert reached up. He took off the grease-stained work cap. He dropped it onto the muddy table next to the poisoned steak. He grabbed a clean white linen napkin from the tray Grace was still holding. Grace watched, breathless. Her heart was thundering against her ribs. Robert wiped the dried mud from his forehead. He wiped the grit from his cheekbones. He cleaned the soot from around his eyes. When he finished, He looked at Victor. The grime was gone. Underneath was a face that had been on the cover of every major business magazine in the country. The piercing, icy blue eyes, the jawline of a man who never lost a fight. "My name is Robert Black," he said. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Victor staggered back. His heels caught on the edge of a mop bucket. He hit the wall hard. "No," Victor whispered. His face turned the color of ash. "No, it is a mistake. Robert Black is in Europe. The chairman is on a yacht. You are a laborer. I saw the mud. I saw the boots." Robert stepped into Victor's personal space. He was a head taller than the manager. He looked down at him with a cold, deadly disgust. "I spent the weekend teaching my son the value of hard work," Robert said. "I wanted him to see the truth of the world, but I didn't expect to find a monster in my own house." Robert pointed to the plate of spoiled meat. "You tried to poison a guest. You tried to humiliate a child, because you thought we were small, because you thought we had no voice." The heavy oak doors of the restaurant burst open. A group of men in expensive overcoats rushed in. Leading them was Marcus Thorne, the CEO of the Regional Hospitality Division. Marcus was pale. He was sweating despite the cold rain outside. He ran down the hallway. He saw Robert in his torn canvas jacket. "Chairman Black," Marcus gasped. He looked at Victor, then he looked at the security team. I came as soon as I got the call. What has happened?" Robert's voice was like cracking ice. "Your manager has turned this sanctuary into a dungeon, Marcus. He has violated every law of hospitality and several laws of the state." Victor's knees finally gave out. He collapsed onto the floor. He was hyperventilating. The arrogance was gone. The polished suit now looked like a costume on a coward. "Sir, please," Victor moaned. He tried to reach for Robert's boots, the same boots he had called trash minutes ago. "I didn't know. I was trying to protect the image of the restaurant. Please. I have a family." Robert did not move. He did not show a flicker of mercy. "You didn't care about the image when you served poison," Robert said. "You didn't care about a family when you mocked my son." Robert turned to Marcus. "Fire him. Effective this second. I want the police here to take a report on the food tampering. I want a full audit of every cent this man has touched." Victor began to sob. It was a pathetic, wailing sound. The security guards stepped forward. They grabbed Victor by the arms and hauled him to his feet. They dragged him away. His polished shoes scuffed uselessly against the floor. The hallway went quiet. Robert turned to Noah. Noah was standing by the table. He looked at his father with a mixture of awe and shock. The lesson of the weekend had taken a turn he never imagined. Then, Robert turned to Grace. Grace was still standing there. She was clutching the water pitcher. She looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. She had seen everything. She had seen the chairman reveal himself. Robert walked toward her. The CEO and the security team stepped back. "And you," Robert said softly. Grace looked up. Her eyes were filled with tears. I am so sorry, Mr. Black. I didn't know it was you. I couldn't let it happen." Robert reached out. He took the heavy water pitcher from her shaking hands. He set it on the table. "You didn't know it was me," Robert repeated. "And that is why you are the only person in this building who is still employed." He looked at the CEO. "Marcus, look at this woman." Marcus nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. Of Tatnian, sir." Robert looked back at Grace. "You risked your job to save a man you thought was a beggar. You showed a billionaire what it means to have a soul." He took a deep breath. The mask of the chairman softened for a moment. He was just a man again. A man who had found a diamond in the mud. "Do not be afraid, Grace," Robert said. "Your life is about to change." Chapter 6. A Legacy of Kindness. The flashing blue and red lights of the police cars reflected against the rain-slicked windows of the Grand Summit. The lobby was silent. Every guest had stopped eating. They watched as two officers led Victor toward the exit. Victor was no longer the arrogant manager in the polished suit. His head was bowed. The handcuffs glinted around his wrists. He had been charged with reckless endangerment and gross violations of food safety. He had tried to use his power to poison the weak. Now, he was the one without a voice. Robert Black watched from the shadows of the hallway as the heavy oak doors closed behind the disgraced manager. The justice was swift. But Robert knew that firing a bad man was only half of the work. He turned his attention back to the woman standing by the service table. Grace was trembling. She looked at the empty hallway, then at the billionaire standing before her. She felt like she was in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare that had suddenly turned into a miracle. Robert walked toward her. His heavy work boots were still caked in mud. His clothes were still torn. But as he approached Grace, he didn't look like a laborer. He looked like a man who had found something more valuable than gold. He reached out and gently took Grace's hand. Her skin was rough from years of hard work. Her fingers were cold. "Grace," Robert said. His voice was warm and resonant. "Tonight you were faced with a choice. You could have kept your head down. You could have protected your paycheck and let a stranger suffer." He squeezed her hand gently. "But you chose your conscience instead. You chose to be a human being in a room full of statues. And for that, I am in your debt." Grace shook her head, a tear finally escaping and rolling down her cheek. I couldn't let that boy get sick, sir. I didn't do it for a reward." "I know," Robert replied. "And that is exactly why you are the only person I trust to run this house." Grace blinked, her breath catching in her throat. "Sir." Robert looked at Marcus, the regional CEO, who was standing nearby. "Marcus, draft the paperwork. Effective immediately, Grace is the general manager of the Grand Summit. She will have full authority over the staff and the standards of this establishment." The room seemed to spin for Grace. "Mr. Black, I don't know anything about being a manager. I am just a waitress." "You know how to care," Robert said firmly. "I can hire people to teach you how to read a spreadsheet. I cannot hire someone to have a soul. You already have the most important qualification." He leaned in closer, his expression softening. "And Marcus, I want a housing grant set up for Grace. I want her moved into a home 5 minutes from here. No more long commutes in the dark. No more worrying about her family's safety while she is at work." Grace covered her mouth with her hand. A sob of relief broke from her chest. In 1 hour, her life of struggle had been transformed. The weight of 1,000 worries had been lifted from her shoulders. Robert turned to his son. Noah had been standing quietly, watching the entire exchange. The anger he had felt earlier had faded. It was replaced by a deep, quiet realization. Robert walked over and put his arm around Noah's shoulders. "Do you understand now, Noah?" Noah looked at Grace. He looked at the muddy bills on the table. He looked at the empty spot where Victor had stood. "I thought being rich meant you didn't have to deal with people like Victor," Noah whispered. "No," Robert said. "Being rich just means you have a bigger responsibility to stop them. True wealth is not found in a bank account, Noah. It is found in how you treat those who can do absolutely nothing for you." Robert looked at the scratched wooden table in the dark corner. He looked at the kitchen doors. "Marcus," Robert called out. "Yes, Chairman." "Clear this table, bring us the finest meal the kitchen can produce. Fresh, perfect, and bring a third chair." Robert looked at Grace and smiled. "Grace, I believe you haven't had dinner yet. Will you join us?" Grace wiped her eyes and stood tall. She pulled a chair out. A few minutes later, the hallway was no longer a place of shame. The new staff under Marcus's direct supervision arrived. They laid a white linen cloth over the scratched wood. They lit a tall, flickering candle. They served the father, the son, and the new manager with the utmost respect. The piano music from the main room drifted down the hall. It sounded different now. It sounded like a celebration. Noah took a bite of his steak. It was delicious. But as he looked at his father and Grace, he realized he wasn't hungry for the food anymore. He was hungry to be the kind of man his father was. The rain continued to beat against the windows of Seattle. The world outside was still cold. The world was still hard. But inside that small corner, there was warmth. There was light. And there was a legacy of kindness that would never be forgotten. True greatness is never measured by the gold in our hands, but by the kindness we offer when no one is watching. Robert and Grace showed us that a single act of integrity can light up the darkest corners of a life. If this story touched your heart, perhaps it is a reminder to cherish the quiet heroes in your own journey. We invite you to join our family by subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments below, as your support helps us keep these memories alive. Now, a new story of hope is waiting for you on the screen. Please click to continue the journey with us.